All right, welcome everybody to the April edition of Science Under the Stars. Of course, we're still virtual, but we're excited to get back out in the fall, hopefully. So stay tuned for that. Our speaker today, oh, I just lost all my Zoom stuff. Hold on. All right, here we go. Our speaker today is Lydia Tressel. Lydia is a first-year PhD student in the Bob Jansen lab here at UT, and her work focuses on phylogenomics and cytonuclear coevolution of alfalfa, which is a lot of ways she studies the inner nuances of the plant. And this plant also happens to be the most important forage crop in the world, which is pretty awesome. And so Lydia also grew up in Toledo, Ohio. She got her undergrad and master's degrees in botany at Miami University. And once this pandemic is over, she hopes to join a community orchestra so she can play her oboe in her free time with other talented musicians, which is pretty cool. So one thing that's a little different about this talk is Lydia has a few points that are audience participation. So when those come about, and I think they might be fairly obvious, feel free to type into the chat and we'll be able to relay those answers and she can see them as well. And as always, you can type your questions into the chat and we'll get to them at the end of the talk. And for those who are religious Science Under the Stars, our next talk is May 13th with Brianna Betke, and she's going to be telling us about ermine mammals. So at this point, I would love to turn this over to Lydia, who's going to give us some great insights as into what we are eating. Lydia, please take it away.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming out. So one of my passions with botany is fruits and vegetables. Everyone likes food. So I thought it'd be interesting to talk about the differences between fruits and vegetables today. So here's a fun cartoon about berries. And so the tomato says, "Can I join the berry club?" And the strawberry says, "Sorry, tomato, berries only." And the tomato says, "Actually, according to this article, I am a berry and you're not." So today we're going to talk about why a strawberry isn't a berry. We're going to talk about why a raspberry isn't a berry. And as you can see, this watermelon is a berry and this banana is a berry. So I'm going to talk about that too. So what we're going to talk about is, where did fruits come from? Different types of fruits, types of vegetables, and then we're going to talk about foraging here in Texas and all the fun stuff you can do. So first I wanted to talk about the difference botanically and culinarily, the definitions between fruits and vegetables. So when you're thinking about culinary, you're thinking that fruits are sweet and vegetables are savory. But that's not correct botanically, and I'll explain why. So here I have a cross section of a carrot, and then here is a peach, and this peach image is going to reoccur pretty often. So the carrot is actually a vegetable. Here are the different cell types. There's phloem and xylem. But as you can see, there's not really anything else. There's just certain cell types. This is actually considered a root, the root part of the plant. And then the peach, you can see that there's a seed. So that's the big difference, the seed here. And the seed is made of the endosperm, which actually gives the growing plant nutrients before it's able to photosynthesize. The embryo is where the baby plant is growing, and then the seed coat is what actually protects the seed while it's still in the fruit. And then this fleshy outer area is called the pericarp. So the big difference between these parts is the seed and the pericarp. So make sure you understand what I'm talking about when I'm talking about the pericarp. So within the pericarp is the endocarp, which is this inner layer, the mesocarp, which is this big fleshy area, at least in this circumstance. And the exocarp is the outer layer, and that's like your skin, so your exoderm. So the first part I wanted to talk about was fruits. So before I can talk about different types of fruits, I wanted to explain important parts of fruits. So fruits actually come from flowers. So a flower is fertilized by pollen, and then once it's fertilized, it develops into a mature ovary and becomes a fruit. So here in the tomato flower, you see this ovary. This ovary is actually going to become this fruit. If you look very closely, it looks like a smaller version of the tomato. So what happens is pollen somehow gets stuck here on the stigma, which is the female part of the plant, and the pollen goes down this pollen tube, and then it fertilizes the ovules, and the ovary becomes mature and turns into a fruit. So next I wanted to talk about the evolution of plants, because that's very important in understanding how flowering plants came about. So the first land plants were mosses, and mosses are those green, small plants that you see in the cracks of your sidewalks and those sort of areas where there aren't a lot of nutrients in the soil. And moss actually don't have any vascular tissue. And what I mean by vascular tissue is that xylem and phloem. So later on in the evolution of plants, vascular tissue came about, and then ferns were the next group of plants. So they had vascular tissue, but they didn't have seeds. And so then the ferns evolved, and they got seeds. And then pine trees, conifers, otherwise known as gymnosperms, was the next group of plants. And this is the pine cone, but it's not a fruit. It's a cone which has seeds in it. So those pines and those conifers have seeds, but they don't have fruits because they didn't have flowers. And so the next trait that came about was flowers. And with the evolution of flowers, we had a whole bunch of diversity. And that's, without flowers, you can't have fruits. So flowers evolved, and then we got fruits. So a fruit is a mature ovary with a seed and endosperm inside, which I talked about before. And there are 3 different fruit types. There's a fleshy fruit, which I have color-coded in orange, a dry dehiscent fruit, which I have color-coded in light green, and a dry indehiscent fruit, which I've color-coded in blue. And on the bottom right corner of each slide, that'll help you keep track of what type of fruit we're in at the time. So again, I wanted to review the regions of a mature fruit before we go into types of fruits. So the seed is the big part where the plant actually grows out of. And then the pericarp, which is made of the endocarp, the mesocarp, and the exocarp. So seed and pericarp, those are the really important parts that you need to remember. So the first section of fruits I wanted to talk about were fleshy fruits. So a fleshy fruit is where that pericarp is fleshy and soft at maturity. So again, here's that peach image, and this pericarp is fleshy. So that's what makes it a fleshy, soft fruit. So the first fleshy fruit is a berry, and the entire pericarp is fleshy, although the skin is sometimes tough and may be one or many seeded. So good examples of berries are grapes, tomatoes, and bananas. Yes, bananas. Bananas are a berry, which I think is really cool. So here is a wild banana, and here's an artificially selected banana. So as you can see, there are seeds throughout the fleshy tissue normally, but through artificial selection, humans have made it so that the seeds are very small. And here's a close-up of a cross-section, longitudinal cross-section of a banana. There's still, you can still see these little seeds, but now, so it's a lot easier to eat than those wild bananas. The next type of fleshy fruit is a pepo, which is actually another type of berry. So a type of a fleshy fruit. So a pepo is a berry with a hard, thick rind, and it's actually a part of the gourd family, which is Cucurbitaceae, and that sounds like cucumber, right? Yeah. So it's the cucumber, the squash, and watermelon. Those are all a part of that same plant family, which all have those pepos as fruits. Another berry type is a Hesperidium, which is a berry with a leathery rind and parchment-like partitions between the sections. This is the citrus family, otherwise known as Rutaceae. So you've got your oranges, your lemons, limes, kumquats. All of those are Hesperidiums. Next is a drupe, which is separate from a berry. It's a fleshy fruit with a hard inner layer, the endocarp or stone, that surrounds the seed. And some good examples of this are the peach, cherry, almond, and pecan. The next fleshy fruit is a pome, which is where the ovary or core is surrounded by edible fleshy tissues. So that hard, gritty core that you don't eat of an apple, that's what defines a pome. So an apple and a pear, those are both pomes. The next fleshy fruit is an aggregate fruit. So this is where strawberries and raspberries come from and where they trick you. They're not berries. They're called aggregate fruits, and that's a cluster of many ripened ovaries produced from a single flower. So it's important to understand that this is from a single flower because the next type of fruits are from multiple flowers. So you have one flower with multiple ovaries within that same flower, which get fertilized, and you get these aggregate fruits. Next is the multiple fruits, and that's a cluster of many ripened ovaries produced from many flowers that are crowded together in the same inflorescence. And here's the inflorescence. So what I mean by inflorescence, I mean a cluster of flowers. So multiple flowers with separate ovaries in the same head, otherwise called an inflorescence. And some examples are the pineapple, Osage orange, and the mulberry. And this is an Osage orange. It's really cool. Back home, a common name for it is monkey brains, actually, because it kind of looks like monkey brains, I guess. And you can find these trees around Lady Bird Lake. So in the fall, you can look out for these fruits. The next are dry fruits. And a dry fruit is where that pericarp is not fleshy, it's dry. And there are two types of dry fruits. There's the dehiscent, where the pericarp splits open along definite seams, and the indehiscent, where the pericarp does not split open and fruits usually contain only one seed. So first we're going to talk about the dehiscent fruits. And I really enjoy dehiscent fruits because my favorite plant family, Fabaceae, which has the legumes in it, is actually a dry dehiscent fruit. So the first dry dehiscent fruit is a legume for the plant family Fabaceae. And it is an elongate bean pod that splits along two seams. And some examples are soybeans, peas, honey locust, the Kentucky coffee tree, black locust, and redbud. And I'm going to talk about the redbud a little later in the foraging section. But legumes are so cool because they're so important. So they actually, in their roots, they host this bacteria called rhizobia in root nodules, which are these little circular structures on the roots. And the reason why they're so important is because they have the ability to take nitrogen out of the air through a process of nitrogen fixation and convert it to be usable for the legume. So the legume's able to get nitrogen because of the rhizobia. And the legume provides the rhizobia with a nodule and a carbon source. And then the rhizobia provides the usable nitrogen. And because these two individuals are working together, it's called a mutualistic symbiotic relationship. Now, usually when people think mutualism, they think of animals. They think of a bird riding a hippo, eating the bugs, and the hippo protecting the bird. But it's really, plants are really cool too, because plants actually have mutualistic relationships with other biological organisms. And so in this case, it's the bacteria working with the legume. Legumes are also really cool because they're really important for agriculture, ecology, and our diets. So agriculturally, they're a source of nitrogen for different cereal crops. So you have corn in the soil first, and then you go through crop rotation, and you have the soybean in the soil to rejuvenate the soil basically with nitrogen again. And it can provide nitrogen for grasses growing in mixed pastures. So legumes are great foraging crops, just like my plant that I study. They're ecologically important because they're a source of nitrogen in many food webs. And they're important to us because they're very nutrient dense. They have lots of protein and they're high in fiber. The next dry dehiscent fruit is a capsule, which is a dehiscent dry fruit with seed pods that split open in various ways and usually along several definite seams. So they can typically split open into well-defined sections. So here's a sweet gum fruit. And as you can see, there's these little open areas. Each one contained seeds that popped out once it was time, once the fruit was mature. And then the next set of fruits are indehiscent fruits. So there is an akene, which is an indehiscent small nut that's very small, one-seeded fruit, and it's usually produced in clusters. So here in this akene, each of these is an akene. So that's what that looks like. And some examples of akenes are buttercups, roses, and the sycamore. And then samaras are really cool. They're a dry fruit that is small winged and one seeded that's usually produced in clusters on trees. And those are found on maple trees and ash trees. And they're really cool because as kids, we used to play with the helicopters. So that's the type of fruit you were looking at and playing with as a kid, a samara. The next type of fruit, the next type of dry indehiscent fruit is a nut, which is a larger, one-seeded indehiscent fruit with a very hard pericarp, so you don't want to just bite into it. You will probably break a tooth. And it's usually enclosed in a husk or cup-like involucre. So an involucre is, there's the flower up here, and the involucre is the leaves that actually cup the flower structure. It's another layer of protection for the flower. So the involucre actually developed into this outer husk-like structure to protect the seeds. And with the acorn, this was actually the involucre at one point. An example of nuts are acorns, beech nut, or the walnut. Next, I wanted to talk about vegetables. So vegetables are basically anything without a seed, any structure on a plant without a seed, without any reproductive tissue. So this is an onion, and the part that we eat is actually a fleshy leaf. It's not a stem, it's not a root. What we're eating are these storage leaves, which are very fleshy. And right here is the stem, and then down here are the roots. The next vegetable I wanted to talk about is a carrot, and the carrot is actually a storage root. So this is the part we eat, this root. And then here's the stem part of the carrot. And then here's the leaves. So everything we eat carrot-wise is found below ground. And another important storage root that we eat a lot of is a sugar beet. And 50% of the table sugar in the United States actually comes from the sugar beet, interestingly enough. So I wanted to end this section with a fun quote. Knowledge is knowing a tomato is a fruit. Wisdom is not putting it in your fruit salad. And philosophy is wondering if a Bloody Mary counts as a smoothie. Make sure you're 21 before making a tomato into a smoothie. So next I wanted to talk about foraging, especially here in Central Texas, which is really fun to do. But there are some rules that you should follow because it can be dangerous sometimes. So make sure you have permission to forage in the area of interest. Make sure you're being safe and it's legal. I know that Texas has a lot of private land, so make sure you're not walking onto someone else's land before you start foraging. Always positively identify anything you plan to eat. You don't want to eat something poisonous. Make sure it's what you think it is. Don't just put it in your mouth. And I'll give you a really good example of something that looks very similar to another plant that's actually deadly. Know what part of the plant is edible, when it is edible, and what you plan on doing to prepare it to eat. So have a game plan. That's a lot easier than just going out and pulling stuff out of the ground and sticking them in your mouth. It's just safer and it helps you formulate a plan in your head, just like a recipe for cooking. Always leave enough for the plant population to easily recover. If you don't leave enough after foraging, then the plant population can't recover and you can't get more foraging opportunities. And also you're taking from nature, so you need to respect it. Never take more than you can use. There's no point in taking more and just throwing it away later. That's very wasteful. Always do as little damage as possible to the plant and its environment. Make sure you have the correct tools when you go out, do extensive research, and make sure to have fun because foraging is really fun. And also, if you get good enough at it, you can also lower your grocery bill. So here are the fruits and vegetables I wanted to talk about. I'm going to talk about acorns, pecans, the burr clover, Queen Anne's lace, the redbud, the pencil cactus, and Turk's cap. So first I wanted to talk about acorns, and acorns are really cool. Especially here in Central Texas. There are over 50 varieties of oak that are native to Texas. And that's to show you the diversity of common oaks. I put this table in, and you can find this Texas tree planting guide at the Texas A&M site. So oaks are a part of the plant family Fagaceae and the genus Quercus. So all of these different varieties of oaks are found in the same genus, in the same plant family. So it's really cool how diverse oaks are here in Texas. One of the first things I noticed when I moved down here was how many oaks there were. And so basically wherever you go, you're going to see an oak tree, and they're huge, they're gorgeous, and you can get plenty of acorns from them for foraging. And you don't have to go very far because you can find acorns right in Austin. So what fruit type do you think this is? It's either a legume, a pome, or a nut. Okay, can't see it. It's a nut. It's a nut. Good job. Here, let me move the. Okay. Yep, it's a nut. Great job, guys. So it's nutritionally important because it has protein, minerals, fats, and carbohydrates in it. And the way that you actually forage the acorn, you have to leach out these bitter tannins out of the acorn. So to do that, you take the cap of the acorn off, which was once that involucre structure that I talked about, and you soak the raw acorn in cold water, and then eventually the water will turn a dark color. And you have to do this multiple times because it can sometimes be difficult to get the tannins out. And you want to make sure they're all out because otherwise whatever you make is going to taste bitter. It will not taste very good. And you do that until you put the raw acorns in the cold water and you don't get any tannins leached. Basically, it's the water's still clear. And you can actually grind the acorns into a flour. You can roast the nuts and add salt, or you can roast and use the acorns as a substitution for coffee, interestingly enough. And some great cooking ideas, you can take the cooked acorns and add raisins to them for a trail mix, or you can turn the acorn into flour and use it for cakes or bread. It can completely substitute normal flour. So lots of really cool recipes. Next are pecans. And I want to make sure you guys understand how to pronounce pecan. I've seen commercials where they've said pecan, and that bothers me. It's actually pecan. That's how you pronounce it. And the species name for the common pecan here in Texas is Cara illinoisensis. And there are actually 18 different varieties of this species that is recommended for planting in Texas. So what type of fruit do you think this is? Do you think it's a legume, a drupe, or an aggregate fruit? You can put it in the chat. And it's actually a drupe. So pecan, like the fruit of all of the members of the hickory genus, is not truly a nut, but it's technically a drupe, a fruit with a single stone or pit surrounded by a husk. The husks of the pecan tree are produced from the exocarp tissue of the flower, while the part known as the nut develops from the endocarp and contains the seeds. So botanically, it's technically a drupulous nut, but for our purposes, it's a drupe. And it's nutritionally important for carbohydrates and proteins. So you can eat the pecans raw or cooked. And you have to make sure when you start foraging that they're the right kind of ripeness. So this is what you want to see on the tree. And there are tons of pecan trees here in Austin. Basically, wherever you go, horticulturalists have utilized the pecan tree, which is really cool. So it's easy to forage even here in Austin. So you want to wait till the pecans are the exocarp is kind of split open so that you can see the seed inside, and then you're going to want to break open that seed to actually get the pecan. And you can also find pecans on the ground if they've already split completely open. Now, when you're foraging these, you have to also be careful because you can find worms in pecan fruits when you're foraging. So last fall, I decided to, I came to Texas. I was like, I want to get my own pecans. I'm so excited. And a lot of my pecans actually had worms in them. I didn't check for holes in the seeds. So before you even decide to forage that specific pecan, make sure no bugs have gotten to it, because otherwise you're going to open it and there's going to be a little mealworm that's going to come out and it's going to be gross. And I had that in my kitchen for a couple weeks. And there are so many recipes for pecans. There's pecan pie, there's so many different pastries. The possibilities are endless. You can just eat the pecans on their own. Really great snack. The next plant I wanted to talk about is the burr clover. So this is actually a part of my group. So this is in the same genus as alfalfa. It's known as Medicago polymorpha. And right now it's everywhere. Where people have been sprayed for weeds, you can pretty much find this species. So it's been a successful collecting season for me with this species. You can eat the seeds raw or roasted. And the seeds can be ground into flour. And they're also made of mostly starches. So this next thing that you can make with the seeds, make sure that you're over 21, because these fruits are made of starches, you can theoretically make them into alcohol, which is really interesting. You can actually chew these seeds and you can spit them out into a bottle, and the enzymes from your spit will ferment the seeds and you will get a very weak alcohol, or you can buy your own enzymes and try to make an alcohol with these seeds. But as you can see, 1 centimeter, they're very tiny, and they have these spines on them, which is not very comfortable to chew on. But if you wanted to make your own homemade alcohol, you could. But I would suggest just grinding the seeds into flour if you really wanted to do anything with them. Another cool plant is Queen Anne's lace, and you can find this a lot back in Ohio. So the species name is Daucus carota, and the species name is carota, so it sounds like carrot. The actual other common name for this plant is the wild carrot, and it's nutritionally good for you because it's high in vitamin A and minerals. And since it's a carrot, the vegetable part of this plant that we like to eat is the root. So you can eat the root raw or cooked, or you can actually crush the leaves for your own homemade insect repellent. But this is where I warn you with foraging. Make sure not to confuse Queen Anne's lace with the deadly water hemlock. And here's the picture of that species, and you can see that they look really similar to one another. So when you're foraging, make sure you know what you're looking at, because it can be difficult. And I'll give you some characters to help you tell the difference. So when you're looking for Queen Anne's lace to forage, make sure you're not looking at the deadly water hemlock. On the left is the stem of the water hemlock. So it's purple and it doesn't have any hairs on it. And over here, this is the Queen Anne's lace stem, and it's green and it has lots of hairs on it. But it might be difficult in the field to look this closely at a plant. So one of the tools that I suggest when you start foraging is for you to get your own hand lens. So it's just a jewelry hand lens that helps you look really closely at plant characters, helps you identify, because some of those characters are really tiny. And having this hand lens is really helpful. The next plant is the redbud. And redbuds are really cool. It's actually another type of legume. So again, Fabaceae. And the species name is Cercis canadensis. and other species because of how pretty the redbud tree is. Horticulturists have utilized that and created tons of different varieties, and it's planted everywhere here in Austin. I believe all the flowers are done now, which is too bad because the open flowers and the young seed pods are what you want to forage. So make sure to check it out next spring. But you can eat the flowers raw or cooked, and the young seed pods cooked. So here's what an open flower looks like. It kind of has those bunny ears to help you tell that it is ready. And the reason why flowers are so yummy is because there's a nectar spur in the middle that actually gives a sweet taste to the flowers. So you can put them on salads. You can just eat them as you're walking along. You could stir fry them. I've personally, when I've gone on walks and I found them, I'll just eat them because they're fun. They're really cute. And then when you eat the young seed pods, make sure that they're purple, not brown, because otherwise they're going to have a really bitter taste and you're not going to like them. And you can cook them and put them on your salads, stir fry them with some rice. Just make sure they're this purple color and not brown. Next is the pencil cactus, which is Cylindropuntia leptocoelus. And it's nutritionally rich in calories. And you can use the fruits to make jam, jellies, or wine. So you will forage the fruits of this plant in the winter, but make sure before you start foraging and before you start cooking into the jams, jellies, or wine, make sure that you remove the thorns from the fruits. And here's a closer up picture. As you can see, there's thorns here in the fruits, and you don't want to eat those. Those wouldn't be too tasty. So make sure before you start cooking, you remove the thorns, because no one wants to take a bite into anything and have something sticking in their mouth like that. And then lastly, I want to talk about Turk's cap, which is Malviscus arboreus. And this is a part of the mallow family or Malvaceae. So it's in the same plant family as the hibiscus, which is a pretty popular horticulture plant. And you can actually eat the flowers, the fruits, or the leaves. And you can eat the flowers and fruits raw or cooked. And the fruit can be made into a tea or a preserve. And the leaves you can actually just eat right off the plant, or you can stir fry them, add them to a salad. And they're nutritionally high in antioxidants. So you can make your own tea. You can just go out and grab some fruit or some flowers and make your own tea, which is really cool. There's tons of Turk's cap around in the fall. That was another really cool plant I noticed when I moved here. And the way that you can identify it is it has this, this flower is closed with the stigma, which is the female part of the flower sticking out. That's what gives you an idea that this is Turk's cap. For more great foraging tips and other species, I think there's over 70 different species on this website. You can check out this website by Mark Vorderbruggen, and it's Foraging Texas. It's a great page to learn about what you can eat here in Texas and how to get it. You can learn a lot, and he also has a cookbook if you're interested in learning what type of recipes he's used. And then since you guys are at this talk, I wanted to suggest having you guys get involved in this great app called iNaturalist. You can record pictures of insects, animals, plants, basically any biological organism that you can get a clear picture of on your phone. and you share it with other scientists and other fellow naturalists. So it's like posted online, and people can help you identify it. And you can talk with other people about it. But it's actually really helpful for scientists like me. I'm looking for certain species in Medicago. And so if you've observed the species I'm looking for, I can just look for it on the app, and the app will tell me a location of where that plant was found. So it's really helpful for scientists like me. And if you want to find a specific bird or specific insect or anything, you can do the same thing. So and it helps you really interact with your environment and really learn what's out there. So it's really fun to learn about the diversity. So I highly recommend getting involved with this. Any questions?
Thank you very much, Lydia. I know it's hard to kind of portray thanks and a round of applause, but I think my microphone's on enough and y'all can hear me clapping. So thank you very much for coming out virtually and giving us an introduction to plants and foraging in our own environments. And we'll monitor the chat for more questions, but I got a few questions that popped up throughout the talk. So if and when we see other ones, we'll get them in, but I'll start. So one of the first ones that was given was that, can you recommend a guide for foraging in urban environments? But I assume that website you gave us would cover that, correct?
Yeah, so that's really good for beginners. But I know there's plenty of more books out there on foraging in Texas specifically. Um, I only know the foraging in Ohio since I just moved here.
Fair enough.
But I do recommend when you're beginning to use that website. It's free and it's easy to use. So before you go buying any books, I would suggest learning a little bit more.
Awesome. And before we go into any more questions, we just want to make an announcement verbally as well as via text that this presentation is recorded, especially part of the Q&A, and will be posted to YouTube. So you can make choices based on your video on, off, etc. Up to you. But we just want to let you know that this is in fact being recorded and will be uploaded. Next question we have. So that you mentioned that you had a pretty successful foraging season thus far in regards to one of your plants. Is this success based on you foraging for things personally, or is this based on your research?
So this is based on my research. So at the University of Texas, we're lucky to partner with this program called EcoLab, where you can get funding from landowners for your research. And I've actually gone to different landowners' properties and have found Medicago. And Medicago is so weedy that you just go into the person's driveway and it's right there. Like I didn't have to go very far to find my plant of interest. Which is really it's nice, but also I would have liked to explore a little bit more.
Oh, I understand that. Yeah, so a lot of people can get these grants, and sometimes you have to go like hours into someone's property to find what you're looking for. But that's really awesome that you're able to kind of pull up sometimes. But I guess there are pros and cons to that as well. So we have a question from Tristan, who most of the questions this individual asks are some of my favorites. So this should be fun. So, I got to scroll up real quick. So what about rhubarb? Botanically, it's a stem, but what about culinary? Is it a vegetable? Is it a fruit? You use it in pastries mainly. So what are your thoughts?
Well, I've had it in pie before, so I don't know I don't know culinarily. You'd have to ask like a chef if you wanted like a correct answer. So, but I think it's more of a savory taste than a sweet taste, I think.
Okay. Okay. That'll work.
But don't completely trust me on that.
Of course not. Of course not. We have another question from Alex Collins. So they really enjoyed the talk. And are there any other unique vegetables like onions that have fleshy leaves that have been modified rather than like the fleshy part that we eat? So are there any vegetables that would fit that category as well?
Um, Garlic, I believe, is a fleshy leaf as well. But I can't remember off the top of my head the normal example that people use is the onion.
All right, that's fair. David once rubbed themselves with either Queen Anne's lace or water hemlock, and they got a terrible rash. So which one was it? And they were in Ohio.
There's a hemlock in Ohio as well that's looks just like it. So you definitely rubbed the hemlock on your, was it your arm? I hope it was just your arm.
We'll leave it at arm. We won't delve any deeper into this madness. So we've had a little discussion in the comments section as well. So Christina is interested in what about pomegranates? So they seem like should be a palm given the name, but they don't think they are. And we had some feedback going back and forth. But what do you think, Lydia? How does a pomegranate get classified?
So a pomegranate is definitely a fleshy fruit. I believe it would be considered a see, these are such good questions because it's really making me question types of fruits.
Right? Welcome to the party.
um I don't want to be wrong though. But I'm gonna throw out there maybe aggregate fruit, maybe, but I'm just throwing it out there.
Yeah, hey, your best guess is our best guess. We can also Google the bejesus out of this if we really want to go wild. What about dragon fruits?
I don't know anything about dragon fruits. I'm sorry.
Does
These are
does anyone?
these are really good questions, guys.
All right, while we're waiting a little bit. So if you were to go out foraging, and then you wanted to put together a meal based on what you can forage for in Texas, what are you looking for? What most excites you about certain plants that you see? Or what would you be most excited to find foraging in Texas or maybe close to Austin?
So back in Ohio, we don't have like cacti or anything like that. And the fruits of cacti are pretty sweet. They taste really good from what I've read. So I've never actually foraged it myself because I feel like it would be a lot of work to get it off and with gloves on and take all the thorns off. But it's definitely a goal of mine while I'm here is to forage some cacti fruit.
That'd be cool. Like prickly
Yeah.
pear? Would that
Yeah,
be considered?
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Also, we can talk after this, but there is a place in Austin that does cactus tacos that are actually really good. So maybe I can give you the location of this food truck.
Oh, definitely. That
Yeah.
sounds cool.
Yeah, they're
I
very
don't I
good.
don't know much about all the food trucks here because of the pandemic, so it'd be nice to learn more from someone who was here before the pandemic.
Soon enough. Soon enough. All right, we have another question. Have you had any success with making anything using acorn flour?
Oh, so I've never gone that far. I'm not a baker. I I could never I'm not good at it. I just wasn't given the gift. So I've never tried to make acorn flour, but I have snacked on acorns just um after I've leached the tannins out, but I haven't like gone far enough to make flour. But I highly recommend it. Maybe I should uh, push myself to do better with my foraging.
So if you were to make acorn flour, you could use that as a substitute for any of the flour we could buy at the store, though? Yes?
Yes, you can.
Okay, that's cool. Are there any advantages to doing that?
It's free.
That's fair. I mean, yeah, obviously the financial reason is pretty solid. Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
So now we're a little interested. You want to touch a little bit on your research with alfalfa?
sure.
Just very
Oh,
briefly.
I could talk about this forever.
I know.
Um, so alfalfa, I'm sure everyone's heard of it. It's when you think of alfalfa, you think of a plant that like cattle eat, which makes sense because it's actually the most important forage crop in the world because all these different livestock eat it because it's rich in nutrients, proteins, nitrogen, all that good stuff. And people eat alfalfa sprouts as well. That's becoming more popular. It actually, I believe it makes around $145 million annually for foraging. So that's why it's really important. And the reason why I'm studying alfalfa is because there have been different evolutionary studies published for this genus, but they've all been incongruent with one another. And we think that could be because of possibly gene duplication. So multiple genomes have caused phylogenies not to be able to be separated, or many other different reasons. So basically, we don't know the evolutionary relationships between the species in this genus. So that's why it's really important for us to study that.
Nice. Very nice. All right, so we do have a couple of brewmeisters in here right now, and the question has been circulating amongst a few. What about hops? So it's 100% of flour and reproductive tissues, but some would say that it's not necessarily a fruit, although it can be fruity. How do you think those get classified?
I think those would be classified as fruits because they're using those reproductive structures for what they're making.
Oh, wonderful fruits they are indeed. All right, we can sit tight for a minute or so, see if anybody has any more questions. Anything that may come to mind, plant-wise, eating-wise, drinking-wise.
I actually studied for my master's. I studied clovers, so that's another type of legume that I've studied. So clearly, I enjoy legumes. So if you have any questions about legumes, I definitely am the person to ask.
Favorite foraged food back in Ohio?
Oh, it's called a pawpaw fruit.
Pawpaw.
So it's gosh, I wish I had a picture of it. But it's basically like a custardy fruit, and it's kind of sweet, and you can forage it in the fall. A lot of people in the Cincinnati area in Ohio eat it. It's tastes really good. So yeah, pawpaws I highly recommend.
For those that are interested, there's a pawpaw fruit. I don't mean to hijack too crazily, but yeah, so it is pretty fleshy though. My goodness.
Yeah, so the people make like different baked goods with them too. Um, so you can just eat them, or you can make it like an apple pie kind of. I know some grad students back at Miami University did that.
Cool. Very cool. All right, Lydia. Well, thank you very much for coming this week on Science Under the Stars and accommodating for a virtual talk. I think we got some really good questions and we got some really good insights as to how we could potentially forage in Austin and maybe back in Ohio as well, solely because that's where the expertise lies. If you would like to, one more round of applause for Lydia. Thank you very much. And again, May 13th, we'll be back out here with Urban Mammals with Brianna Betke. Everyone have a good night. Get those shots when you can. And hopefully we'll see y'all in the fall. Have a good evening, everyone.